The morning sun cast long shadows through the dense forest as Captain Marcus led his patrol along the winding trail. The three soldiers behind him moved quietly, their boots crunching softly on fallen leaves. They had been searching for 2 days. Now, following reports of bandits in the area who had been terrorizing merchants traveling the King's Road, Marcus raised his hand, signaling the patrol to stop. Something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds sang in the trees above, and even the usual rustling of small animals had ceased. His weathered face, marked by years of service to the crown, showed concern as he studied the path ahead. "Sir," whispered Sergeant Thomas, the youngest member of their group. "Look there, between those oak trees." Marcus followed Thomas's pointing finger and felt his blood run cold. Bound tightly to a massive oak tree was a figure in the distinctive red and gold uniform of the Royal Guard. The man's head hung forward, obscuring his face, but the uniform was unmistakable. Royal Guards were the elite protectors of the kingdom, trained from childhood and sworn to defend the royal family with their lives. "Stay alert," Marcus commanded his men as they approached cautiously. This could be a trap. As they drew closer, the bound figure stirred slightly. His uniform was torn and stained with dirt and blood, suggesting he had been there for some time. Thick ropes secured him to the tree at his chest, waist, and ankles. His hands were tied behind the trunk, and a gag had been stuffed into his mouth. The Royal Guard lifted his head slowly as he heard their approach. His eyes were swollen and bruised, but Marcus could see the intelligence and determination that still burned within them. Despite his obvious suffering, the guard's posture remained as proud as his bonds would allow. "By the gods," breathed Private Wilson, one of the older soldiers, "that's Sir Edmund Blackthorne." Marcus felt his heart skip. Every soldier in the kingdom knew that name. Sir Edmund was not just any royal guard. He was the personal protector of Princess Isabella, the king's beloved daughter. Stories of his courage and dedication were told around campfires throughout the realm. He had saved the princess from assassins twice and had never left her side for more than a day in 5 years of service. "Cut him down quickly," Marcus ordered, drawing his knife. As Thomas worked to slice through the ropes, Marcus gently removed the gag from Edmund's mouth. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The royal guard coughed and gasped, his voice hoarse when he finally spoke. "Water," he managed to whisper. Wilson quickly handed over his water skin, and Edmund drank gratefully, though his hand shook from exhaustion and whatever ordeal he had endured. "Sir Edmund," Marcus said respectfully, "I am Captain Marcus of the Northern Patrol. What happened to you? Where is the princess?" Edmund's eyes filled with anguish, and for a moment, Marcus thought the proud guard might break down completely. Instead, Edmund straightened his shoulders as much as his weakened condition would allow. 3 days ago, Edmund began, his voice growing stronger with each word. Princess Isabella insisted on visiting the village of Millbrook. The people there had been suffering from a terrible sickness, and she wanted to bring them medicine and comfort personally. I advised against it. The roads have been dangerous lately, but she would not be dissuaded. Marcus nodded. The princess was known throughout the kingdom for her compassion and her refusal to let others suffer while she lived in comfort at the palace. It was one of the reasons the people loved her so dearly. "We traveled with a small escort," Edmund continued. "Just myself and 4 other guards, as the princess insisted she did not want to frighten the villagers with a large military presence. We made good time and reached Millbrook before sunset. The princess spent hours tending to the sick, distributing medicine and bringing hope to people who had lost everything to the plague." The guard paused, his eyes distant as he relived the memory. "She was like an angel among them, Captain. I've never seen such kindness, such genuine care for people she had never met. Children who had been too weak to stand found the strength to smile when she spoke to them. Mothers wept with gratitude as she held their fevered babies." "But something went wrong," Marcus prompted gently. Edmund's face darkened. "We stayed the night at the village inn. I should have insisted we return to the palace immediately, but the princess wanted to see how the medicine was working the next morning. I posted guards around the building, and took the first watch myself. The royal guard's hands clenched into fists as he continued. Around midnight, I heard a commotion from the princess's room. By the time I reached her door, it was too late. The window was open, and she was gone. My fellow guards were unconscious, drugged, we learned later. Someone had poisoned the ale we drank with dinner. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The kidnapping of Princess Isabella would send shockwaves throughout the kingdom. The king would mobilize every soldier, every resource at his disposal to find his daughter. I tracked them through the forest, Edmund went on. Kidnappers were skilled, but they could not hide their trail completely from someone who has hunted in these woods since childhood. I followed them for a full day and night, barely stopping to rest. When I finally caught up to their camp, I tried to free the princess, but there were too many of them. The guard's voice broke slightly. I fought as hard as I could, Captain. I killed 3 of them before they overwhelmed me. But it was not enough. They beat me unconscious, and when I awoke, I was tied to this tree. The princess. They had taken her somewhere else. Thomas, who had been listening intently while keeping watch, spoke up. Sir, did you see which direction they went? Do you know who they were? Edmund shook his head painfully. They wore masks, but I heard them speaking. They were not common. Bandits looking for ransom? Their leader spoke like an educated man, possibly nobility. And they mentioned something about the old fortress and preparing for the ceremony. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. There were ruins of an ancient fortress deep in the forest, abandoned for decades after a fire had destroyed most of the structure. Local legends claimed it was cursed, and most people avoided the area entirely. It would be the perfect place to hide a kidnapped princess. How long have you been tied here? Marcus asked. 2 days, I think, Edmund replied. They left me here as a warning, or perhaps as bait. The leader said that when the king's men came looking, they would find me and know that resistance was useless. Wilson handed Edmund some dried meat from his pack. Sir, you need to eat something. You have to regain your strength, Edmund accepted. The food gratefully, but his mind was clearly focused on only one thing. Captain, every moment we waste here is another moment the princess remains in danger. These men, whoever they are, they have plans for her. Dark plans. I could see it in their leader's eyes. Marcus was already formulating a plan. Thomas, ride back to the main camp immediately. Tell Commander Harrison what we have learned and request reinforcements. Wilson, you will escort Sir Edmund back to the nearest town where he can receive proper medical attention. No, Edmund said firmly, struggling to his feet despite his obvious weakness. I will not abandon my duty to the princess. I've failed her once already. I will not do so again. Sir Edmund, Marcus said respectfully but firmly, you can barely stand. You will be of no use to the princess in your current condition. The royal guard's eyes flashed with determination. I know these forests better than any man alive, Captain. I know the old fortress and its secrets. Without me, you will waste precious time searching for the right path while the princess suffers. Every minute could be the difference between life and death for her. Marcus studied the wounded guard's face and saw the unshakable resolve that had made Edmund a legend among the royal guard. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, the man's will was unbroken. More importantly, he was right. His knowledge could be invaluable in a rescue mission. Very well, Marcus decided, but you will ride, not walk. If you collapse, we are carrying you back to safety whether you like it or not. Edmund nodded gratefully. Thank you, Captain. The princess. She is more than just royalty to the people of this kingdom. She is hope itself. We cannot let that light be extinguished by whatever evil has taken her. As the patrol prepared to continue deeper into the forest, none of them could have imagined the terrible truth they would soon discover about Princess Isabella's fate, or the heart-wrenching choice that would soon tear Sir Edmund's world apart. The journey through the dense forest proved more treacherous than Captain Marcus had anticipated. Sir Edmund, despite his weakened state, rode at the front of their small group, guiding them along hidden paths that only someone with his extensive knowledge of the wilderness could navigate. His injuries were clearly causing him great pain, but his determination never wavered as they rode deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker and the sunlight became scarce. Ancient oaks and towering pines created a canopy so dense that it felt like riding through a green tunnel. The air grew cooler and held an oppressive quality that made all the men uneasy. "The old fortress is still several hours ahead," Edmund said, his voice strained but steady. "But we should reach the outer perimeter before sunset. That is when we must be most careful." Private Wilson, who had insisted on staying with the group, despite Marcus's initial orders, rode alongside Edmund with concern evident on his weathered face. "Sir, you mentioned these kidnappers are not ordinary bandits. What makes you so certain?" Edmund was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the forest ahead. "Their equipment, for one thing. The ropes they used to bind me were of the finest quality, not the rough hemp that common criminals would use. Their weapons were well maintained, expensive steel, and their horses." He paused, remembering. "I caught a glimpse of their mounts as they rode away. Thoroughbreds, Captain, or horses worth more gold than most bandits see in a lifetime." Marcus felt his unease growing. "You think they are working for someone with significant resources?" "More than that," Edmund replied grimly. "I think they are working for someone with a personal vendetta against the royal family. The way their leaders spoke about the princess. There was hatred there, but also something else. Satisfaction. As if this kidnapping was the culmination of a long-planned revenge." Sergeant Thomas, who had been riding quietly behind them, suddenly raised his hand. "Stop," he whispered urgently. "I hear something." The patrol halted immediately, straining their ears to catch whatever sound had alerted the young sergeant. Through the forest came the faint sound of voices, still too distant to make out individual words, but clearly human. Edmund's eyes sharpened, despite his exhaustion. "We are closer than I thought. Those voices are coming from the direction of the fortress ruins." Marcus made quick hand signals to his men. They dismounted and secured their horses to trees well off the main path, then began moving forward on foot. Edmund, despite his injuries, moved with the silent grace of a man who had spent years perfecting the art of stealth, as they crept closer to the source of the voices. The ruins of the ancient fortress began to emerge through the trees. The structure had once been magnificent, with high stone walls and elegant towers reaching toward the sky. Now only portions of the walls remained standing, covered in thick vines and moss. Most of the towers had collapsed, leaving piles of rubble scattered throughout the area. But someone had been working to make portions of the fortress habitable again. New wooden structures had been built against the remaining stone walls, and smoke rose from several chimneys. Torches lined what had once been the main courtyard, casting flickering light across the ancient stones. The patrol took cover behind a fallen section of wall and peered into the courtyard. What they saw made Marcus's blood run cold. At least 20 armed men moved about the area, all wearing the same dark clothing and carrying weapons that confirmed Edmund's assessment of their quality and expense. In the center of the courtyard, a large wooden platform had been constructed. Upon this platform sat an ornate chair, almost throne-like in its design, and in that chair sat a figure that made Edmund gasp in recognition. "Lord Aldrich Ravencroft," Edmund whispered, his voice filled with shock and anger. Marcus had heard the name before. Lord Aldrich had once been a trusted advisor to the king, a man of noble birth and considerable wealth. But 5 years ago, he had been accused of treason and banished from the kingdom after it. It's discovered he had been secretly negotiating with enemy forces during the border wars. "I thought he had fled to distant lands," Marcus whispered back. "Apparently not," Edmund replied grimly. "He has been here, planning his revenge all this time." Lord Aldrich was a tall man with sharp features and cold gray eyes. His once handsome face had been marked by years of bitterness and hatred. He wore fine clothes, despite his surroundings, maintaining the appearance of nobility even in exile. As the patrol watched, he stood from his makeshift throne and began pacing the platform. "My lord," called one of his men from below, "the preparations are nearly complete. The ritual can begin at dawn as planned." Ritual. The word sent chills through Edmund's entire body. This was worse than a simple kidnapping for ransom. Lord Aldrich had something far more sinister planned for Princess Isabella. Excellent, Lord Aldrich replied, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. 5 years I have waited for this moment. 5 years of exile, of living like a common criminal, all because of that foolish king and his precious family. Tomorrow, he will learn what it truly means to lose everything he holds dear. Marcus saw Edmund's hands clench into fists, and he placed a restraining hand on the royal guard's shoulder. As much as they all wanted to charge into the courtyard and fight, they were vastly outnumbered and needed to be smart about their approach. "Where is the princess?" Wilson whispered. Their question was answered moments later, when a group of Aldrich's men emerged from one of the wooden structures, escorting a figure between them. Even from their hiding place, there was no mistaking the graceful bearing and golden hair of Princess Isabella. Edmund had to bite back a cry of anguish when he saw her condition. The princess's usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her dress torn and dirty. Her hands were bound in front of her, and she walked with obvious difficulty, suggesting she had not been treated gently during her captivity. But even in her current state, Princess Isabella carried herself with the dignity befitting her royal blood. Her head was held high, and when Lord Aldrich spoke to her, she met his gaze without flinching. "Your Highness," Lord Aldrich said with mock courtesy, "I trust your accommodations have been adequate, though I suppose they are quite different from what you are accustomed to in the palace." Princess Isabella's voice, when she spoke, was clear and strong despite her circumstances. "Lord Aldrich, I should have known. You always were a coward who preferred striking from the shadows rather than facing your enemies honorably." Aldrich's face darkened with rage, but he controlled himself with visible effort. "Tomorrow, my dear princess, you will learn the price of your family's arrogance. Your father destroyed my life, took everything I had worked for, cast me out like a common criminal. Now he will watch as I take the thing he treasures most." "My father banished you because you are a traitor," Isabella replied boldly. "You sold information to our enemies, information that cost the lives of brave soldiers. You deserved far worse than exile." Lord Aldrich struck her across the face, and Edmund nearly broke cover before Marcus's iron grip held him back. The princess staggered but did not fall, and when she looked back at Aldrich, there was no fear in her eyes, only contempt. "Take her back to her cell," Aldrich commanded his men. "Make sure she is prepared for tomorrow's ceremony. And remember, she must be unmarked for the ritual to be effective." As the princess was led away, Edmund felt his heart breaking. Woman he had sworn to protect, the woman whose safety meant more to him than his own life, was being held by a madman with plans that grew more ominous by the moment. "We have to do something," Edmund whispered urgently to Marcus. "Whatever ritual he has planned, it will happen at dawn. We are running out of time." Marcus was already formulating a plan. "Wow, Thomas, you need to circle around to the north side of the fortress. See if you can find where they are holding the princess and identify any weak points in their defenses. Wilson and I will continue observing from here to get a better count of their numbers." "What about me?" Edmund asked. "You are going to rest and regain what strength you can," Marcus replied firmly. "I know you want to charge in there, but you are no good to the princess dead. We need you alive and thinking clearly." Edmund wanted to argue, but he knew Marcus was right. His body was still weak from his ordeal, and exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Reluctantly, he nodded his agreement as Thomas slipped away into the darkness. The remaining members of the patrol settled in to watch and wait. The activity in the courtyard continued well into the night, with Aldrich's men making various preparations that the watchers could not fully understand, but which filled them with growing dread. Around midnight, they observed something that made Edmund's blood run cold. A group of men dressed in dark robes entered the courtyard, carrying strange ceremonial objects and what appeared to be an altar stone. These were not simple mercenaries or soldiers. They moved with the purposeful precision of people conducting a religious ceremony. "This is no ordinary revenge plot," Edmund whispered to Marcus. "Aldrich has allied himself with practitioners of the dark arts. Whatever he has planned for the princess involves some form of ritual magic." Marcus had heard stories of such things, though he had always hoped they were merely legends. The idea that Lord Aldrich would resort to such methods spoke to the depths of his madness and hatred. As dawn approached, the activity in the courtyard reached a fever pitch. More torches were lit. The strange altar was positioned in the center of the platform, and the robed figures began chanting in a language none of the watchers recognized. Edmund knew that time had run out. Whatever was going to happen to Princess Isabella would begin with the sunrise. As he watched the first faint light appear on the horizon, he made a silent vow that he would either save the princess or die in the attempt. His failure to protect her during the initial kidnapping had already haunted him beyond measure. He would not fail her again. Asterisk, as the first rays of dawn broke through the forest canopy, the ancient fortress courtyard came alive with sinister activity. The robed figures had arranged themselves in a circle around the altar, their chanting growing louder and more intense with each passing moment. Lord Aldrich stood beside his makeshift throne, watching the proceedings with dark satisfaction. "Captain?" Marcus felt his heart pounding as he realized they were out of time. Whatever ritual Aldrich had planned was about to begin, and they still had no clear plan for rescuing Princess Isabella from the heavily guarded fortress. 20 armed men against their small group of 4 seemed like impossible odds. Sergeant Thomas returned from his scouting mission just as the sun began to rise above the treetops. His face was grim as he crouched beside Marcus and Edmund behind their cover of fallen stones. "The princess is being held in a wooden structure built against the north wall," Thomas whispered urgently. "There are 2 guards posted outside, but the building itself looks hastily constructed. You might be able to break through the back wall, but we would need a distraction to draw attention away from that area." Edmund's eyes never left the courtyard, where preparations for the mysterious ceremony continued. "What kind of distraction did you have in mind?" Before Marcus could answer, a commotion erupted near the main entrance to the fortress ruins. Lord Aldrich's men were escorting Princess Isabella toward the altar, and even from their hiding place, the patrol could see that she was struggling against her bonds. The princess had been dressed in a white ceremonial robe that seemed to glow in the early morning light. Her golden hair flowed freely around her shoulders, and despite everything she had endured, she maintained the regal bearing that had made her beloved throughout the kingdom. But Edmund could see the fear in her eyes, carefully controlled but unmistakably present. "Bring her forward," Lord Aldrich commanded, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "The ritual must begin precisely at sunrise, or all our preparations will be worthless." The robed figures intensified their chanting as Princess Isabella was led up the steps to the platform. She walked with dignity, despite her obvious terror, and when she was positioned near the altar, she turned to face Lord Aldrich with defiance still burning in her eyes. "You cannot truly believe that whatever dark magic you are attempting will bring you satisfaction," Isabella said, her voice strong. "Despite her circumstances, revenge built on such foundations will only destroy your soul." Lord Aldrich laughed bitterly. "My soul was destroyed 5 years ago when your father branded me a traitor and cast me out like refuse. Everything I am now, everything I have become, is his creation. Let him live with the consequences." Edmund could bear it no longer. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to act, to fight, to do something other than crouch helplessly behind stones while the woman he had sworn to protect faced whatever horrible fate Aldrich had planned. "I am going in there," Edmund whispered fiercely to Marcus. "I cannot watch this happen." "You will get yourself killed and accomplish nothing," Marcus replied, gripping Edmund's arm. "We need to be smart about this." "Then what do you suggest?" Edmund demanded, his control finally beginning to crack under the strain of the past few days. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying the layout of the fortress and counting the positions of Aldrich's men. Then his weathered face took on the determined expression of a soldier who had made a difficult decision. "Wilson, Thomas, you will create a distraction at the main entrance. Make as much noise as possible. Draw their attention away from the altar. Edmund and I will approach from the east side and try to reach the princess during the confusion." Sir Wilson protested quietly. "That is suicide. Even if we draw some of them away, you will still be outnumbered 10-1. "Perhaps, Marcus acknowledged, "but we cannot stand by and watch while they harm the princess. Sometimes a soldier's duty requires him to attempt the impossible." Edmund felt a surge of gratitude toward the captain. Marcus owed him nothing, had no personal obligation to risk his life for the princess. Yet he was willing to attempt a desperate rescue simply because it was the right thing to do. In the courtyard, the ceremony was reaching a critical point. The chanting had become a rhythmic crescendo, and one of the robed figures approached the altar, carrying a curved dagger that gleamed wickedly in the morning sunlight. Princess Isabella's eyes widened as she saw the weapon, but she stood her ground with the courage that had always defined her character. The blood of royalty, spilled at the moment of sunrise, will grant us the power to bring down the kingdom that cast us out, Lord Aldrich declared to his assembled followers. Today, we begin our revenge against the crown and all who serve it. Was enough for Edmund. With or without a plan, he could not wait another second while the princess faced mortal danger. He rose from behind cover, drawing his sword with a ringing sound that seemed to echo through the entire forest. "For the crown and Princess Isabella," Edmund shouted, charging toward the courtyard with all the speed his injured body could muster. His battle cry galvanized his companions into action. Marcus followed immediately behind him, while Wilson and Thomas burst from the forest on the opposite side of the fortress, yelling at the top of their lungs and creating the distraction they had planned. The effect on Aldrich's men was immediate and chaotic. Guards who had been watching the ceremony spun toward the multiple sounds of attack, unsure where the real threat was coming from. Some ran toward Wilson and Thomas, while others moved to intercept Edmund and Marcus. But Edmund fought like a man, possessed. Despite his recent ordeal, despite his exhaustion and injuries, he moved across the courtyard like an avenging spirit. His sword sang through the air, cutting down 2 of Aldrich's men before they could properly draw their weapons. "Protect the ritual," Lord Aldrich screamed. But his carefully organized ceremony had dissolved into pandemonium. Princess Isabella, seeing her chance during the confusion, managed to break free from the guard holding her. She ran toward Edmund, her white ceremonial robe flowing behind her like wings. "Edmund?" she cried out, her voice filled with relief and joy at seeing her protector alive and fighting for her. Freedom. But their reunion was cut short as more of Aldrich's men converged on their position. Edmund found himself surrounded, fighting desperately to keep the attackers away from the princess while also trying to clear a path to safety. Marcus appeared at Edmund's side, his own sword bloody from the fight. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted over the clash of steel and the shouts of fighting men. The 2 soldiers fought back to back, protecting Princess Isabella between them as they slowly fought their way toward the edge of the courtyard. But the odds were simply too great. For every man they defeated, 2 more seemed to take his place. Edmund felt a sword blade slice across his shoulder, adding a new wound to his collection of injuries. His vision blurred momentarily from pain and exhaustion, and he stumbled, nearly falling. "Edmund?" Princess Isabella caught his arm, helping to steady him. Her touch seemed to give him renewed strength, reminding him of exactly what he was fighting for. But their situation was becoming desperate. Wilson and Thomas were engaged in their own fierce battle on the far side of the fortress, too far away to provide assistance. Marcus was bleeding from multiple wounds, and Edmund knew his own strength was fading fast. Lord Aldrich, seeing that his ceremony had been ruined, but that his enemies were trapped, began to smile with cold satisfaction. Commanded his men, "But bring me the princess alive. Can still complete the ritual, even if not at the precisely planned moment." That was when Princess Isabella did something that shocked everyone in the courtyard. She stepped forward, away from Edmund's protective position, and spoke in a clear, commanding voice that carried the full authority of her royal blood. "Stop," she commanded Lord Aldrich. "I offer you a bargain." The fighting gradually ceased as everyone turned to look at the princess. Even Aldrich's men seemed compelled to listen when royalty spoke with such conviction. "I will surrender myself to you willingly," Isabella continued, "if you allow these brave men to leave unharmed. They came here to rescue me, and they should not die for their loyalty and courage." "No!" Edmund shouted immediately. "Princess, I cannot allow you to sacrifice yourself for us. My duty is to protect you, not the other way around." Isabella turned to look at him, and Edmund saw something in her eyes that he had never noticed. Before, it was not just gratitude or friendship. There was something deeper, more profound. In that moment of crisis, with death threatening them all, The barriers of rank and protocol seemed to fall away completely. "My dear Edmund," she said softly, "some things are more important than duty. Some things are more important than protocol. And some things are worth any sacrifice." Lord Aldrich was studying this exchange with growing interest. "How touching," he said sarcastically. "The princess has feelings for her guard dog. This adds an interesting element to our situation." The evil lord's eyes gleamed as a new, even more cruel idea took shape in his mind. "Very well, Your Highness. I accept your bargain, but with a modification. Your guard friends may leave, but Sir Edmund stays. I think I can devise an even more satisfying revenge than I had originally planned." Edmund felt his heart stop. Whatever Aldrich had in mind, it would be designed to cause maximum suffering to both him and the princess. The sadistic smile on the lord's face promised horrors worse than death. "Choose," Princess Aldrich continued with malicious glee. "Save your other protectors and condemn your beloved guard, or refuse my offer and watch them all die fighting. Hopelessly against impossible odds." Princess Isabella's face went pale as she realized the terrible position she had been placed in. The choice before her would haunt her forever, regardless of what she decided. But as she looked into Edmund's eyes, she saw him give her the slightest nod, indicating his willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice for her and for the kingdom. They both served. The silence that fell over the fortress courtyard was more deafening than the clash of swords had been. Princess Isabella stood frozen, her face pale as moonlight, as the weight of Lord Aldrich's cruel bargain settled upon her shoulders. Around them, both friend and foe waited for her decision, knowing that whatever she chose would echo through the remainder of their lives. Edmund stepped forward, his sword still in his hand, but lowered now in acceptance of what was to come. Blood dripped from his various wounds, but his voice was steady and clear when he spoke. "Your Highness," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed emotions that protocol would never allow him to express in words. "I have served you faithfully for 5 years. In all that time, my greatest honor has been knowing that my life had meaning because it was dedicated to protecting something pure and good in this world. That honor does not end here." Princess Isabella's eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall. "Edmund, I cannot make this choice. I cannot trade your life for theirs, just as I cannot condemn them to die in my place. There must be another way." Lord Aldrich laughed with genuine amusement. How noble, how utterly predictable. This is exactly the kind of soft-hearted thinking that makes royalty unfit to rule. In the real world, princess, choices have consequences. Power requires the ability to make hard decisions, to sacrifice some for the good of others. Captain Marcus, still bleeding from his own battle wounds, limped forward to stand beside Edmund. "My lord," he said to Aldrich, "you speak of choices and consequences, but what you offer is not a choice at all. It is merely cruelty disguised as mercy." "Perhaps," Aldrich acknowledged with a shrug, "but it is the only offer you will receive. Decide quickly, princess. My patience has limits, and my men grow restless." The robed figures who had been conducting the interrupted ritual were gathering around the altar again, clearly hoping to resume their dark ceremony regardless of how the current standoff was resolved. Their presence reminded everyone that time was running short, and that worse fates than death might await if the situation dragged on much longer. Princess Isabella looked around the courtyard, taking in the faces of the men who had risked everything to save her. Marcus wounded but still standing proud. Wilson and Thomas now disarmed and held at sword point by Aldrich's guards, but showing no regret for their actions. And Edmund, her faithful protector, who had never once failed her until the moment when an impossible situation had made failure inevitable. "I need to know something first," she said to Lord Aldrich. "What happened to you? You were not always like this. I remember when you served at court, you were different. Bitter, perhaps, and ambitious, but not evil. What changed you into this?" Aldrich's expression darkened, and for a moment, a mask of cruel satisfaction slipped to reveal something deeper and more painful underneath. "What changed me? Your father's righteousness changed me. His absolute certainty that he could judge my actions while ignoring his own failures. The exiled lord began pacing back and forth on the platform, his voice growing more heated as he continued. Yes, I negotiated with enemy forces during the border wars. But do you know why, princess? Because your father's strategy was leading us toward a disaster that would have cost thousands of lives. I tried to find a diplomatic solution, a way to end the conflict without pointless bloodshed. Princess Isabella frowned, confused by this version of events that differed so dramatically from the official accounts she had heard. But the soldiers who died because of the information you provided, would have died anyway, Aldrich shouted. The only difference is that my actions might have shortened the war and saved countless others. But your father could not tolerate the idea that someone else might have a better solution than his own. So he branded me a traitor and destroyed my life, rather than admit that his approach was flawed. Edmund had heard enough. Even if that were true, he said firmly, it does not justify what you are doing now. Whatever mistakes the king may have made, the princess is innocent. She has spent her life helping people, caring for those who suffer, bringing hope to the hopeless. Your quarrel is with her father, not with her. Lord Aldrich turned his cold gaze on the royal guard. Innocent. She is the symbol of everything I lost, everything that was taken from me. Through her, I can finally make the king understand what it feels like to lose what matters most. The princess stepped forward, her chin raised in determination. Then let me be that symbol, Lord Aldrich. Take your revenge on me directly. But these men have families, people who love them and depend on them. They came here because of their loyalty to the crown and their sense of duty. If you must have blood to satisfy your need for vengeance, take mine alone. What he found instead was the same unwavering courage that had made her beloved throughout the kingdom, the same strength of character that had driven her to tend to plague victims and comfort the suffering. You would truly sacrifice yourself for them, he asked. And for the first time since the confrontation began, there was something other than malice in his voice. You would die to save men who are not even of noble blood? Without hesitation? Isabella replied immediately. A true ruler serves her people, not the other way around. These men have proven their worth through their actions. If my death can preserve their lives, then it is a fair trade. Edmund felt his heart breaking as he listened to her words. The woman he had protected, the woman he had secretly loved from afar, was preparing to sacrifice herself with the same casual nobility she had always shown, but he could not allow it to happen. Princess, he said urgently, remember what you told me once about the nature of true victory? You said that winning was not about defeating your enemies, but about remaining true to your principles, no matter what they cost you. If you die here today, Lord Aldrich wins nothing. Your father will still be king, your people will still love your memory, and your sacrifice will inspire others to continue the good work you began. Isabella turned to look at him, and Edmund saw an understanding dawn in her eyes. She realized that he was not trying to dissuade her from sacrifice, but rather helping her see that there might be another path, another way to remain true to her principles while also achieving victory over their enemy. You are right, my faithful Edmund, she said softly. But the question remains, how do we find that other path? Lord Aldrich was growing impatient with their philosophical discussion. Enough, he commanded. Princess, you will choose now, or I will make the choice for you by killing all of them while you watch. That was when Sergeant Thomas, still held at sword point by two of Aldrich's guards, spoke up for the first time since his capture. My lord, he said to Aldrich, before you, proceed with whatever you have planned should you not know that reinforcements are already on their way. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward the young sergeant. Aldrich's face went pale as he absorbed the implications of Thomas's words. What reinforcements? Aldrich demanded. Thomas smiled grimly. Did you think we would attempt a rescue without sending word back to our commanders? Captain Marcus is a careful man, my lord. Before we approached this fortress, he sent a message to the main garrison detailing our location and our plans. If we do not return by midday, 300 royal soldiers will surround this place and tear it apart stone by stone to find the princess. Edmund felt a surge of hope, but also concern. If Thomas was telling the truth, then help was indeed coming. But 300 soldiers attacking the fortress would turn the entire area into a battlefield, and such chaos protecting the princess. would become nearly impossible. Lord Aldrich seemed to be thinking along the same lines. His face cycled through several emotions: fear, anger, calculation, and finally, a cold determination that was somehow more frightening than his earlier rage. "If that is true," Aldrich said slowly, "then our timeline has changed dramatically. The ritual cannot wait for the perfect conditions. We must proceed immediately, before any reinforcements arrive." The robed figures around the altar began chanting again, more urgently than before. One of them approached Princess Isabella with bonds designed to secure her to the sacrificial stone, while others prepared the ceremonial dagger and various other implements whose purpose Edmund did not want to contemplate. "Wait," Princess Isabella said, raising her hand to stop the approaching figures. "Lord Aldrich, you said you once tried to save lives during the border wars. Somewhere inside you, there must still be a part of the man who valued human life over political gain. Can you not see that what you are doing now makes you exactly the kind of person you once opposed?" For a moment, just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Aldrich's features. Princess Isabella pressed her advantage, speaking with all the conviction and compassion that had made her a beacon of hope to her people. "You have already won your revenge," she continued. "My father will suffer knowing that I died because of his past decisions. My death will haunt him for the rest of his life. But if you kill me through this dark ritual, you will also destroy whatever remains of your own soul. Is your hatred truly worth such a price?" Lord Aldrich was quiet for a long time, staring at the princess with an expression that was impossible to read. Round them, his men waited for orders, while the robed figures continued their low chanting in the background. Finally, Aldrich spoke, and his voice was softer than it had been since the confrontation began. "You are very much like your mother, Princess." She also had the ability to see good in people who had forgotten it existed in themselves. Edmund felt a flicker of hope. If the princess could reach whatever humanity still existed within Lord Aldrich, perhaps there was still a chance for all of them to escape this nightmare alive. But that hope was shattered when Aldrich's expression hardened again. The cold cruelty returned to his eyes. "Unfortunately," he continued, "I learned long ago that goodness is a luxury that the world does not allow. Your mother's kindness could not save her from the plague that took her life, just as yours cannot save you from the consequences of your father's choices." The princess's face fell as she realized that her appeal had failed. Lord Aldrich was too far gone, too consumed by his need for revenge to be reached by reason or compassion. "Proceed with the ritual," Aldrich commanded his robed followers. "Have wasted enough time on sentiment." As the figures moved toward Princess Isabella again, Edmund made his decision. He had failed to protect her during the initial kidnapping, and he had failed to rescue her from this fortress. But he would not fail to stand beside her in her final moments. If she was going to die, then he would die with her, fighting to the very end. "For the crown," Edmund shouted, raising his sword one last time. But as he prepared to make his final charge, the sound of horns echoed through the forest around the fortress, and the thunder of approaching hoofbeats shook the ground beneath their feet. Asterisk. The sound of approaching cavalry grew louder with each passing second, and Lord Aldrich's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. His face went white with rage and desperation as he realized that his plans were crumbling around him. The robed figures stopped their chanting and looked around nervously, clearly unprepared for a battle against trained soldiers. "Impossible," Aldrich muttered. "They cannot have gotten word back so quickly." Edmund felt a surge of fierce joy despite their desperate situation. Help was coming, which meant Princess Isabella might still have a chance to survive this ordeal. But his elation was short-lived as he saw the murderous expression that crossed Lord Aldrich's face. "If I cannot have my perfect revenge," Aldrich snarled, drawing his own sword, "then I will at least have the satisfaction of ending her life myself before they can stop me." The exiled lord leaped down from the platform and strode toward Princess Isabella with deadly intent. Edmund threw himself between them without hesitation, raising his blade to block Aldrich's attack. The two swords met with a ringing clash that echoed across the courtyard. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, Edmund fought with the desperate strength of a man defending everything he held dear. But Lord Aldrich was fresh and driven by years of accumulated hatred and rage. The duel was fierce, but brief, with both men trading blows that would have been fatal if not perfectly parried or dodged. Around them, chaos erupted as the sound of the approaching army grew closer. Some of Aldrich's men fled toward the forest, while others prepared to make a last stand in the fortress ruins. Captain Marcus, despite his wounds, managed to break free from his captors during the confusion and move to protect Princess Isabella's flank. The thunder of hoofbeats reached a crescendo as the first royal cavalry burst through the tree line and into the fortress clearing. Edmund caught a glimpse of banners bearing the royal coat of arms and felt his heart soar. But his momentary distraction cost him dearly as Lord Aldrich's blade slipped past his guard and opened a deep gash across his chest. Edmund staggered backward, blood flowing freely from the wound. His vision blurred, and he felt his strength finally beginning to fail after days of injury, exhaustion, and stress. But he forced himself to remain standing, knowing that if he fell now, nothing would prevent Aldrich from reaching the princess. "Edmund," Princess Isabella cried out, seeing his injury. She started to move toward him, but Marcus caught her arm. "Stay back, Your Highness," the captain commanded. "Let him finish this." Lord Aldrich pressed his advantage, raining blow after blow on Edmund's increasingly weak defense. The royal guard managed to parry most of the attacks, but more and more were getting through, adding new wounds to his growing collection. "You should have stayed tied to that tree," Aldrich taunted between sword strokes. "At least then your death would have been quick and clean." "My death was always going to be in service to the crown," Edmund replied through gritted teeth. "The only question was when and how. I am content that it will be here, defending the woman who represents everything good and noble in this kingdom." Their blades locked together at the hilts, bringing the two men face to face. Aldrich's eyes burned with madness and hatred, while Edmund's remained clear and determined despite his pain. "You are a fool," Aldrich whispered. "She is just one person. No single life is worth dying for." "You are wrong," Edmund replied quietly. "She is not just one person. She is hope itself. She is the promise that tomorrow can be better than today, that is worth any sacrifice." With a surge of strength that came from somewhere deep within his soul, Edmund broke the blade lock and stepped backward, giving himself room for one final attack. He knew he was too weak to survive much longer. But if he could just wound Aldrich seriously enough to stop him from harming the princess, was when the first wave of royal cavalry crashed into the fortress courtyard like an avalanche of steel and fury. The professional soldiers made short work of Aldrich's remaining followers, cutting through their disorganized ranks with devastating efficiency. At the head of the cavalry charge rode a figure that made Princess Isabella gasp with surprise and relief. King Richard himself had come to rescue his daughter, his face a mask of cold determination as he surveyed the scene before him. The sight of the king seemed to drive Lord Aldrich into a final frenzy of rage. If he could not escape, if his revenge had failed, then he would at least take the royal family's most precious treasure with him into death. He abandoned his duel with Edmund and lunged directly toward Princess Isabella, his sword aimed at her. Edmund, despite his wounds and exhaustion, managed one last, desperate effort. He threw himself forward, intercepting Aldrich's charge and taking the blade meant for the princess deep into his own body. The sword punched through his chest with a wet, horrible sound, and Edmund felt his life beginning to ebb away. But even as he was dying, Edmund managed to grasp Lord Aldrich's sword arm and hold it steady, preventing the lord from withdrawing the blade for another attack. The two men stood locked together in a macabre embrace while Princess Isabella screamed and King Richard shouted orders to his soldiers. "Now you die with me?" Aldrich whispered into Edmund's ear. "Was saving her really worth your life?" Edmund looked past Aldrich's shoulder to where Princess Isabella stood, her face streaked with tears but alive and safe. Behind her, King Richard was dismounting from his horse and moving toward them with his own sword drawn. The nightmare was finally over. The princess would live, the kingdom would continue, and the darkness that Lord Aldrich represented would be ended. "Yes," Edmund whispered back with his dying breath. "It was worth everything." Lord Aldrich's eyes widened in shock as he felt Edmund's grip on his sword arm tighten one last time. The royal guard, even in death, was still protecting his princess. With his final act of strength, Edmund twisted his body and drove them both to the ground, ensuring that Aldrich would be unable to threaten anyone else. King Richard reached them just as they fell. With a single stroke of his sword, he ended Lord Aldrich's life, but it was too late to save Edmund. The faithful guard's eyes were already growing dim as his life's blood soaked into the ancient stones of the fortress courtyard. Princess Isabella fell to her knees beside Edmund, taking his hand in both of hers. "Edmund, stay with me," she pleaded. "Help is here. You are going to be all right." Edmund's lips curved into the faintest smile as he looked up at her face. "My princess," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I have... one last confession to make." "Do not speak," she said urgently. "Save your strength." But Edmund shook his head slightly. "I need... to tell you that serving you these 5 years has been the greatest honor. Life and that... I have always..." His voice trailed off as he struggled to find the words that protocol had never allowed him to speak. Princess Isabella squeezed his hand tighter, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she whispered back. "I have always known. And I want you to know that you have been more than just my protector. You have been my dearest friend, my most trusted companion, and..." She leaned closer, speaking so softly that only he could hear her final words to him. Whatever she said brought peace to Edmund's eyes and a genuine smile to his lips. "Thank you," he breathed, and then Sir Edmund Blackthorne, the most faithful of the royal guards, closed his eyes for the last time. The fortress courtyard fell silent, except for the sound of Princess Isabella's quiet weeping and the distant calls of soldiers securing the area. King Richard knelt beside his daughter and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. But even he seemed moved by the sacrifice they had witnessed. "He died as he lived," the king said quietly. "In service to the crown and in protection of those who could not protect themselves, there is no more noble end for a knight." Princess Isabella nodded through her tears, but her heart was breaking. The man who had been her constant companion, her faithful guardian, her secret love, was gone forever. The kingdom was safe, the threat had been ended, but the cost had been almost too great to bear. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the ancient fortress, Princess Isabella remained kneeling beside Edmund's still form. Holding his hand and remembering all the times he had stood between her and danger, all the quiet moments they had shared, and all the words that had never been spoken but were understood nonetheless. The rescue was complete, but for Princess Isabella, the real tragedy was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the events at the old fortress, but Princess Isabella still woke every morning expecting to see Sir Edmund standing guard outside her chamber door. The habit of 5 years was not easily broken, and each dawn brought a fresh reminder of the terrible price that had been paid for her freedom. The kingdom had celebrated her safe return with festivals and parades. Ballads had been written about the brave rescue mission, and Lord Aldrich's name had become synonymous with treachery and evil throughout the realm. But for Princess Isabella, the celebrations felt hollow. How could she rejoice when the man who had made her rescue possible would never see another sunrise? She stood now in the royal gardens, at the site of a new monument that had been erected. In Edmund's honor, the marble statue captured him perfectly, tall and noble, his sword at his side, his eyes gazing steadily toward the horizon as if watching for threats that might never come. At the base of the statue, carved in elegant script, were the words, "Sir Edmund Blackthorne, faithful guardian, true knight, devoted servant of the crown." King Richard had wanted to add more elaborate language about duty and sacrifice, but Princess Isabella had insisted on the simpler inscription. Edmund had never cared for grand gestures or flowery speeches. He had been a man of action, not words, and she felt that the monument should reflect his humble nature. "I thought I might find you here." Princess Isabella turned to see Captain Marcus, approaching along the garden path. His wounds from the fortress battle had healed well, though he still favored his left arm slightly. He had been promoted to commander of the royal guard in recognition of his bravery, but Isabella knew the honor brought him little joy. Like her, he was haunted by the memory of what had been lost. "I come here every morning," Isabella admitted. "It helps me feel close to him somehow." Marcus nodded, understanding. "He would be honored by the monument, Your Highness, and by the changes you have made to the kingdom in his memory." Princess Isabella had indeed made changes. Inspired by Edmund's sacrifice and his unwavering dedication to protecting others, she had established new training programs for the royal guard that emphasized not just fighting skills, but also the moral principles that should guide a true protector. She had also created a fund to support the families of soldiers who died in service to the crown, ensuring that their sacrifices would not leave their loved ones destitute. But perhaps the most significant change had been in Isabella herself. The ordeal had awakened something within her, a deeper understanding of what it meant to lead and serve. She no longer simply visited the sick and poor out of duty. She worked tirelessly to address the root causes of their suffering. She had convinced her father to establish new hospitals, to reduce taxes on the common people, and to create programs that would help lift families out of poverty. "He changed me," Isabella said quietly, her eyes still fixed on the statue. "Used to think that being a good princess meant being kind and charitable. But Edmund taught me that true leadership requires so much more. It requires the willingness to sacrifice everything for those you serve." "He loved you, you know," Marcus said gently. "It was obvious to everyone who saw you together, though he never spoke of it directly." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes, as they did every time someone mentioned Edmund's feelings for her. "I know. And I loved him too, though we both knew it was impossible. The barriers of rank, the demands of duty. There was no future for such feelings in the world we lived in." "Perhaps not in that world," Marcus agreed. "But the world has way of changing, especially when people like you work to make it better." Princess Isabella considered his words as she studied the marble face of her fallen guardian. Edmund had died believing that some things were worth any sacrifice, that protecting what was good and noble in the world justified giving up everything else. She had spent the past 3 months trying to live up to that ideal, trying to become worthy of the sacrifice he had made. "There is something I need to tell you," Isabella said suddenly, turning to face Marcus directly. "Something I have never told anyone else." The commander waited patiently for her to continue. "In those final moments at the fortress, when Edmund was dying, I told him something that I had never said aloud before." Isabella's voice grew soft with memory. "I told him that I would have given up my title, my position, everything, for just one day as a common woman who could love him freely, without the constraints of duty and protocol." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "What did he say?" He smiled. Isabella replied, tears flowing freely now. "And he said that he had known, that he had always known, and that it was enough. Just knowing that I cared for him was enough to make his whole life worthwhile." The two stood in comfortable silence, both lost in memories of the man they had known and respected. Around them, the garden bloomed with the flowers that Edmund had always loved, simple wildflowers rather than the elaborate roses that usually filled royal gardens. Isabella had ordered the change specifically because she remembered Edmund once commenting that wildflowers were more beautiful because they grew freely, without needing constant care and attention. "Your Highness," Marcus said eventually, "there is something you should know. Yesterday, a young woman came to the palace asking to speak with you. She said her name was Sarah, and that she was Sir Edmund's younger sister." Isabella felt her heart skip. She had known that Edmund had family in a distant village, but he had rarely spoken of them, and she had never met any of his relatives. "What did she want?" Isabella asked. "She wanted to thank you," Marcus replied. "She said that Edmund had written to her regularly throughout his service, and that every letter mentioned how proud he was to serve someone who truly cared about the people of the kingdom. She also said, ... Double quotes, Marcus hesitated. "Please tell me." "She said that Edmund's final letter, written just days before your trip to Millbrook, mentioned that he had never been happier or more fulfilled in his life. He wrote that serving you had given his existence meaning and purpose that he had never imagined possible." Isabella felt a warmth spread through her chest, despite her sadness. Even in death, Edmund was still managing to provide her with comfort and strength. "I would like to meet her," Isabella said. Will you arrange it? Of course, Your Highness. Is Marcus prepared to leave? Isabella called after him. Commander, do you think Edmund would be proud of what I have become? Of the changes I have made? Marcus turned back with a gentle smile. Your Highness, I think Sir Edmund would be amazed and humbled to know that his sacrifice inspired you to become the leader this kingdom needs. He always believed in you, even more than you believed in yourself. Everything you have accomplished since his death is simply proof that his faith was justified. After Marcus left, Princess Isabella remained in the garden as the sun climbed higher in the sky. She thought about Edmund's sister, about the letters he had written, about the love that had existed between them despite all the obstacles that kept it hidden. As she stood there, a gentle breeze stirred the wildflowers around Edmund's monument. And for just a moment, Isabella could almost imagine that he was standing beside her again, watching over her as he always had. The thought brought her both sadness and comfort. Sadness for what could never be, but comfort in knowing that his spirit lived on in every good deed she performed, every life she touched, every positive change she brought to the kingdom. Thank you, my dear Edmund, she whispered to the statue. Thank you for teaching me what true love means. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. And thank you for believing in me, even when I did not believe in myself. The wind stirred the flowers again, and Princess Isabella smiled through her tears. She could not bring Edmund back, could not undo the tragic events that had taken him from her, but she could honor his memory by becoming the person he had always seen in her. She could live a life worthy of his sacrifice, a life dedicated to serving others with the same faithfulness and devotion that he had shown her. As she walked back toward the palace, Princess Isabella felt Edmund's presence with her, not as a ghost or a memory, but as an integral part of who she had become. His love had transformed her, his sacrifice had inspired her, and his unwavering faith in her potential had given her the strength to become the leader her people needed. The story of the royal guard bound to a tree had become legend throughout the kingdom, but for Princess Isabella, it was not just a story. It was a daily reminder of the power of love, the meaning of sacrifice, and the truth that some bonds transcend even death itself. And in living that truth every day, she ensured that Sir Edmund Blackthorne's greatest victory was not his final battle in the fortress courtyard, but the lasting change he had wrought in the heart of the woman he had died to protect. Years would pass, and Princess Isabella would eventually become Queen Isabella, ruling with wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering dedication to her people that would make her reign legendary. And in every decision she made, every life she touched, every positive change she brought to the world, the spirit of a faithful guard who had loved her from afar would live on forever.